Welcome to the first ever strictly YouTube video for the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined by my co-host, Dalton Willie. And Dalton, today we have the unveiling of our combined top 12. And between the two of us, there were some differences. So this is averages. I think on a later podcast, we'll probably talk about some disparities. But today we're just pulling the averages. But first, how are you on this very toasty July day in the Casey Lawrence area?
I'm incredibly hot, and I was even hotter earlier when I found out Aaron Jones would not be part of our combined top 12. My fifth overall ranked player, and I don't know where he is on your list, but he's not in your top 20.
He is 21, and I think by that, he was the first one left off of this list. We could start at the top, or actually, do you want to go 12 to 1 or 1 to 12? Let's go 12 to 1. Let's
go 12 to 1.
All right. So, number 12, Austin Ekeler. Surprisingly, shockingly, not on your list at all. This is a guy who I gave you the knowledge today is ADP number 12 or number 2, excuse me, among running backs, and I'm assuming overall. So Ekeler comes in at 12 for us, and I guess I would say this is a guy that is tied in to a wonderful offense, probably top 10 in the NFL. His team knows how to use him. It's not the Christian McCaffrey where they overuse him, which is good, but he gets all of the high leverage and important touches, most of the red zone looks. He gets the passing game. He gets all those high value touches. And yeah, I think he's going to regress a little bit. I'm a little down on him compared to most other people, but I think this guy is still a first round pick in my mind.
It is absurd he's going second overall above Christian McCaffrey. I'll get that off my chest right away. That is the Fantasy Pros ADP, which kind of compiles everybody from sleeper onward. Underdog ADP, he is all the way down at the 6th pick. So there's definitely where the sharper money is. I do think he is a little cheaper.
Which is right where I have him actually. So
yeah. And there are concerns about Isaiah Spiller, and they're just concerns. I mean, that is 24 total touchdowns last year, I believe. There's a high touchdown mark for him to repeat. And he certainly can.
And I'm glad you mentioned Spiller, because I think that's also part of why I have him at 6 instead of where he finished last year at 2. Is I think Spiller will prove to be more capable as a backup than anybody who was there last year, because they were searching and they just found no one worthwhile last year to use.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, if you're drafting him over CMC over injury concerns for CMC, you should probably look at Austin Ekeler's injury logs from every year that wasn't last year, because he's in the same boat if you want to slap labels on people like that.
Mm-hmm. DeAndre Swift comes in at number 11 for us, and this for me is kind of a plant my flag on skill and hope the situation works out. You know, there's been a little Lions hype. I listened to a couple Establish the Run podcasts after you sent me their bold predictions recently, and Adam Levitan kind of excited about the Lions, got me excited about DeAndre Swift. I think they both mentioned, like, if you can find a prop somewhere for him to lead the NFL in all-purpose yards, maybe take that long shot. And you know what? It's not impossible. The biggest key for him is going to be health. Number one, the guy has not played a full season yet, or really anywhere too close in his first 2 years, which is probably partially why his usage has been so subdued. But the second thing he's going to have to improve is the usage. We talked about a couple weeks ago that when games are close, Jamal Williams is like kind of the lead back, has been the last couple, or was last year, excuse me. And then Swift took over late. If Swift even gets just the slightest uptick, he's got the talent to fulfill this rank and more, I think. So I love getting him at the end of the first, if that's where you're at in drafts.
Yeah, and I agree with you. This is where I kind of want to plant my flag. It's funny. Last year, huge DeAndre Swift hate from me, huge Austin Ekeler love from me. This year, Swift snuck all the way up to 13 in my own rankings, and Eckler's all the way out of the top 20. I do agree. Other than Amon St. Brown and Hawkinson, I think there's some deflated prices on the Lions, and I think they could be a better team. Game script last year, a lot of close games that didn't go their way, and maybe with some leads, DeAndre Swift gets some better looks. Arguably the best offensive line in the NFL. You have king of dump downs in Jared Goff, which is always going to lead to some valuable games. We saw that in week 1 last year, San Francisco, Detroit, Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift exploded. I think Swift had close to 40 PPR points. So I love the guy. I think that he's in a good system that can reward him. They're a bad team overall, but they certainly have the right attributes to help inflate his ADP, and I like getting him in that 1-2 turn area.
And even if they're like a 5, 6, 7 win team, that's going to be a big help compared to last year for him too, because that likely means there are more touchdowns there up for grabs, and he being their best offensive player should hopefully benefit a little bit in that regard as well. Number 10, Dalton, Davante Adams. Remind me, was he in your top 12 too? He just snuck in the mine. I couldn't remember if he was right outside or if he was in yours.
He was in my top 12 as well.
So we're both very pro Davante Adams. He's like a mid second round, early to mid second round type of guy in other places I've seen. But yeah, obviously leaving Aaron Rodgers for Derek Carr is a bit of a downgrade. But this is a guy who I think if he were in Green Bay would be a top 6 overall pick. So that downgrade is baked into this price, I think, at number 10 overall. And I just think that he's at 37% or higher red zone target percentage in 3 of the last 4 years, I believe is the stat. So I think that red zone stuff is here to stay. Waller's never been a huge touchdown guy. Renfro's great in the red zone, but I think Adams is immediately the preeminent red zone guy through the air. And I just think those other guys are going to be hurt more by Adams than he is by them, because he is the best player on this offense.
Yeah, I mean, arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL we've seen. Granted, he's had an entire career tied to a Hall of Fame quarterback, but I mean, you're getting him at a deflated price, and this almost feels like a steal. I mean, the guys we have in front of him are pretty established as elite wide receivers. And if Davante Adams is even close to what he was at getting a 32% target share in Oakland, then he's just going to absolutely smash his ADP. So I mean, even where he's being taken, his ceiling is still, the overall 1 wide receiver, overall 1 fantasy scoring player. I love getting him there. Just the guys I have in front of him, I do feel like there's a little more of a higher scoring potential, or their range of outcomes are a little safer when it comes to floors.
I will say at number 9 here, Jamar Chase. Dalton, does it make you a little queasy at all to have Jamar Chase, who, for as awesome as he was last year, it's only 1 year? Are you at all nervous about Jamar Chase over Davante Adams, or do you think that we should feel pretty solid in that?
I am, and if you look at Jamar Chase's game logs last year, I would say his consistency as a player probably left some value. There was a 0.8 point game, which you normally, you get those with everybody. But my concern is that he starts to see the newfound too high safety. He gets locked down. Last year, I went and looked at Matt Harmon. Matt Harmon was talking about how Jamar Chase wasn't getting overly double covered like a lot of number ones do. I think that's obviously going to change. Obviously, there was the Chiefs
maybe
game.
Although T. Higgins being there, I think he and T. Higgins help each other out a lot in that regard. Yes, Chase should still see more double teams, but Higgins is a 1B in his own right. So that does alleviate a little bit of that, I think.
Yeah. And my biggest concern would be the too high safety looks. We saw what that did to Tyreek Hill, where he had to change his game, but he was also, 7 years into his NFL career. I don't know if Jamar Chase can work an intermediate game and still be this highly successful of a fantasy player. I still think he'll be a good player, but I don't know if you're going to be getting those boom weeks you might need from him.
Yeah. I mean, he still took plenty of short stuff, and made big plays out of it. He's great after the catch, just an awesome route runner, impossible to cover one-on-one. So that you have to double team him. But like I said, hard to do with T. Higgins on the other side. I do think if Higgins is healthier all season, then this rank is more right than where he was last year, which was probably like top 5 overall by season's end. If you're just looking at position players, Higgins got hurt week 2. It was a shoulder. He had surgery after the season. So he missed a couple weeks and then was playing with that all year and was still awesome when he came back. So I think there's going to be a smaller gap between those two. But I think the thing that we're going to see with Chase is people are going to scream regression, touchdown regression, regression in these big explosion games, which there might be a little bit. But I think this is kind of like the new Tyreek Hill thing, where it's like this guy is just so awesome,
Just too good for
that he's just not going to regress the way normal people who have great seasons might.
Yeah. And I could definitely see that happening as well. We'll see whether or not his quarterback can support him or if Joe Burrow is really what we think he is.
Mm-hmm. I will say, I think that we have the potential maybe for a little bit of a higher volume passing attack this year. Now that he's 2 years removed from the knee, the offensive line, hopefully, should be a little bit better, give him more protection, maybe a little bit less kid gloves with Burrow at certain points of the season, like they kind of started off the year last year. Stefon Diggs, Dalton, at number 8. This guy is the best route runner in the NFL, playing with one of the 3, 2, whatever you want to say, best quarterbacks in the league. There's a lot of vacated targets around him. I think a lot of people just want to give most of those to Gabe Davis, and he certainly could get a lot of them. But like, what if Stefon Diggs also just has an increase in targets, which I think is definitely possible. He had somewhat of a down year last year after just an elite first year in Buffalo. I think this is just a home run, one of the best 4 to 5 receivers in the league and one of the best offenses with one of the best quarterbacks, like high ceiling, very high floor in Stefon Diggs here at 8.
Well, and it's funny, I hear a lot of people that are just not excited about Stefon Diggs. His usage last season was almost completely the same. The problem was he didn't have any 100-yard games or any multi-touchdown games after week 10.
Mhm.
So you just never really saw it. But what he did have was a double-digit game every game but 3 times last year.
Yep.
So consistency was there. He was also the second most double-covered player, the second to Davante Adams. And if we do see a Gabriel Davis explosion and Gabriel Davis can command some more coverages, or if the Bills offense just has more weapons and they can spread it out more and Diggs gets cleaner looks and less double coverages, that would be really good. And
which is realistic, not just with Gabe Davis. They have James Cook in there, who's a pass catching running back, and they clearly telegraphed that's what they wanted with going out and getting JD McKissick for like a hot second and then not having that happen and then drafting basically new JD McKissick and James Cook. And then you have Dawson Knox, who's a young tight end who could still and should still improve, frankly.
Yeah, and I know Josh Allen went out on like up the playoff game of our lives, and it was an amazing game. Josh Allen's season was pretty up and down. There's the Steelers game, there's the Jacksonville game, there's even the Atlanta game where he did not look good. And as a passer, he was really bad.
Mhm.
And Stefon Diggs still managed to put points up in those games. So if you think there's a more consistent version of Josh Allen still out there to be found, then there's an even better version of Stefon Diggs. And he's probably like one of my favorite dark horses to finish wide receiver 1 because he has everything there. He just needed like a few more lucky games last year. And
yeah,
there.
It's wild to think that the same Josh Allen that can do what he did in the playoffs, both games, also existed in a 9-6 loss to the Jaguars. Like,
yes.
5 or 6 weeks prior to that. That's pretty wild to consider. All right, Joe Mixon at 7. Dalton, I'll let you start on Mixon, but I will just say this is a guy who was maligned for years and years. He finally delivers, and do we have confidence in him in back-to-back years to come up big for fantasy managers?
Well, the first thing I don't get is there's a lot of Chris Evans talk as like a late round target. Samaje Perine out-touched him pretty significantly. But if you're buying into the Bengals offense,
Perine did just lose them the Super Bowl, basically. I will say.
Yes.
I will say.
Well, the play calling might have done that, but
Yes.
that's yet to be seen. But at the end of the day, if you're buying into this offense, you should buy into the number 1 back who gets the most work, and that is Joe Mixon. If the offensive line improves, then Joe Mixon's range of outcomes skyrockets. And more importantly, if T. Higgins and Jamar Chase take another jump, which they should because they're very young receivers, then the number of stacked boxes this very elusive back is going to be seeing is going to decrease. And his number of touchdown opportunities is going to increase as these teams are more likely to spread coverages out and thin the red zone looks in the starting 8 at the offensive and defensive lines. So I like him. I think that he is going to have another great year, and he seems like a really safe bet because he gets 15 to 18 touches a game in a high volume, high attacking offense.
And I know there's a lot of consternation last year about his passing game work, and we kind of saw the Bengals played that as we're not going to overtax the guy in the regular season. And then once the playoffs came, he was a high usage. It wasn't like a bunch of downfield stuff, but he was getting the looks, at least in the dump downs and like bubble screens and things like that in the passing game. I'm not sure what we can count on in the passing game with Mixon, but I will say if they do pass more, which I think is very possible, you could see a shift from, maybe take away a couple carries a game and add a reception or two, which I think everybody would say, great. We love that for Joe Mixon.
Absolutely. And you could also see Joe Burrow coming to understand that maybe he doesn't need to take as many sacks and he has a dump off in Joe Mixon, which seemed to be an issue last year that Burrow held the ball a little too long.
Mm-hmm. So Derrick Henry at number 6, and I think you and I have talked about this enough. People know where we stand here. We just kind of have to, give him his respect, tip of the hat at this point. You said it on last week's pod with LeJoy and Eli. We've ate a lot of crow on Derrick Henry over the last couple of years. So he was far and away the best running back last season before he got hurt. He was the RB14 on the season, despite playing just 8 games. So you kind of have to put him in the first round. Just for reference, he outscored Javonte Williams, who played every game last year. This is not on Javonte by any means. That's just how good Derrick Henry was in half a season. He averaged 23 points per game, which was 2 more than Jonathan Taylor, who was obviously the RB1 by season's end. If CMC can be top 2 after the last 2 years of injury concerns, I think Henry should still be a mid to late first round pick. I just think the disparity between us and others is going to be, people have him as like a top 3 or 4 overall pick. I'm just not quite able to get there.
I still don't even love him at 6. In all honesty, I'm just really worried about the Titans as a whole without AJ Brown. They had a horrible offensive line last year. Derrick Henry is otherworldly. Derrick Henry's also almost 29 years old, which getting close to that dangerous age for running backs. Also, the 300 touch mark, we've talked about that years on in. He hit it consistently. And the way he gets his points and the way Christian McCaffrey get their points are a little different in the sense that CMC is elusive and can get out of bounds and can catch the balls. Derrick Henry is getting hit almost every play because he's running the ball up the gut. I understand taking him here because the upside we saw it last year is absolutely absurd. I still do not like the pick.
So I'm going to pull this stat from the newsletter that should be out by the time this video is posted on YouTube. This is from the Titans portion on Derrick Henry. You realize he averaged 27.4 carries per game last year. Over the last 3 years, he's averaged 23.7 carries per game, and that number has gone up each of the last 3 years. That just cannot last. Cannot last. All of that exists in my mind, and yet I have to rank this guy in the top 12 because he's just been that good.
Yeah.
Dalvin Cook at number 5. So this is probably the biggest disparity between the two of us as far as top 12 guys. I have him at 3, you have him at 10, but we can both agree that Cook is one of the best backs in the NFL. He's worthy of a first-round pick. And even if the Vikings are going to pass it more, which I do think they will, but we talked about on the NFC preview show, they're probably not going to be as pass-heavy as people are forecasting or hoping for. Dalvin Cook has only had 3 receiving touchdowns in his career, but he does have a 50-catch and a 500-yard season under his belt. I don't see any reason why he can't do that again. It's not like he's a great pass catcher, but he's fine, and he's just an amazing player that they're going to want to get the ball. He ran routes on about half of their passing plays last year, so I think he can have some value there. And then there's touchdown regression from last year that should go the positive way for him. He had almost no rushing touchdowns. It was like 5 or 6 last year, when in a lot of years, this is like a candidate for 14 to 16 touchdowns.
Yeah. And I like Dalvin Cook a lot. I have him ranked at 10 because I still have concerns about whether or not Kevin O'Connell and this new Vikings offense is going to be like the Rams 2.0, like everybody just wants to pigeonhole into. And that's just me factoring in like a range of outcomes where things don't go well for the team at all. And Kevin O'Connell's not a good OC, and the situation gets worse because Dalvin Cook has been a great fantasy running back and a real life running back, but he's also benefited from a heavy usage scheme with Mike Zimmer for so many years. And I do feel like his backup in Alexander Madison might woo the coaching staff and be getting his own looks in this offense.
I will say that if somebody wanted to go with either of the next 2 receivers instead of Cook, because that's kind of going to be your choices, I cannot blame you, because Cook has been a headache when it comes to injuries. the last couple of years. So that's obviously a concern with him. Number 4, a shock here. We have Cooper Kupp, not the number 1 receiver on our consensus board. There's not a whole lot to say about Kupp, though, really. He literally had the season for a receiver last year. He's going to regress, but he's still going to be awesome. Like, he's still going to catch a lot of touchdowns. He's still going to get a ton of volume. Will that volume go down? Perhaps. But he was playing with one of Robert Woods or Odell Beckham Jr. most of last season. So it's not like adding Allen Robinson is adding a guy that just flat, like no one in that stratosphere existed all year in that offense. Not the case. But perhaps A-Rob commands more volume and produces more than those guys do all season. I still think Kupp is going to have an insane year, just a slight step down from like best of all time.
Yeah. And I mean, number 4 overall is nothing to laugh at. Triple Crown winner deserves a lot of respect. I did steal this from Matt Harmon. Cooper Kupp saw the highest coverage rate from a linebacker in the NFL last year, and that's because Sean McVay schemes it really well. And that's why
these other teams should figure out how to scheme it the other way.
Well, exactly. And that is my concern, is that we have a full season of tape on Kupp and what that offense looks like under a good quarterback that's not named Jared Goff. And teams are probably going to start to recognize why Cooper Kupp's getting that linebacker looks. Still an amazing guy, but he also had the highest percentage of easy targets in the NFL last year, which lends itself to having an incredible fantasy season. And I think those both go down. Linebackers are less likely to fall onto Cooper Kupp because defenses are going to look for him. And I think his easy targets go down because he's probably going to see more bracket coverages. And then I do think Allen Robinson's probably the best of the 3 he's played with. No disrespect to Odell, but Odell did not get to learn the system for an entire offseason like Allen Robinson will. And all of that just detracts a little bit. Cooper Kupp's still, my second wide receiver, so I still think he's going to have an amazing season.
Yep. And Cam Akers is back, so maybe they lean a little bit more on him than the other running backs who were there last year. Obviously, majorly depends on how Akers looks this year.
Yeah, if he is back, we'll see.
Yes. But Justin Jefferson at 3, I think this is officially the Justin Jefferson podcast of all podcasts. I doubt you're going to find him any higher or even this high, most anywhere. Dalton, you have him at 3. I have him at 4. I actually swapped him and Kupp. I was too scared to do it originally. You doing it emboldened me. He said by the end of the year, he's going to be the best receiver in the NFL above Davante Adams. And you know what? I think that's true. I actually believe that's going to happen as well. We've talked about it ad nauseum. This is a guy who's had insane yardage totals, like to the tune of 1,500 yards his first 2 years, but below average by that standard of yardage, touchdown numbers. The Vikings were 11th in the NFL in red zone rushing. The Rams, who we obviously know their coach came from the Rams, were 5th highest red zone pass rate. So just that alone should lead to more looks in the red zone. And then he just has to like break a couple of more long plays that end up in touchdowns, which is very likely for a guy of this skill. He's going to have just an unbelievable season.
Yeah, and I gave the negative case for the Vikings, and I think even if the Vikings bottom out as a team, it still works out for Jefferson. Best player gets the best looks, and more importantly, I am a big proponent of Thielen at cost right now, but there is a more than likely outcome where Thielen does lose another step this year just because he's getting very old, and I'm also
decrepit. He's decrepit. He's old. He's 4 years older than us. He is an old and decrepit man.
And I am also a fan of Irv Smith, but neither of those guys can do what Justin Jefferson can
do. Yeah, they're just not on his level.
Yeah, sure. And if this team's pass rate goes up to like 4 or 5% above the NFL average, Justin Jefferson has the real ability to like lead the league in yards, touchdowns, and targets like Cooper Kupp did last year. And I think more likely than not, he can – like his range of outcomes of breaking that record isn't something crazy. And I would love to bet like offensive rookie of the year, or offensive player of the year. Justin Jefferson right now is plus 3,500. Love that bet. I think that's a good bet.
I will say I'm getting tired of like Justin Jefferson in the Cooper Kupp role. It's like, no, he just has to be in the role he's been in. He's been amazing. He's awesome. One of the best in the NFL already. All right. Number 2, Jonathan Taylor, a little different from consensus as well. I have him at 1. You have McCaffrey at 1, who we'll get to in a second. I gave you the tie here and put McCaffrey at 1. I mean, he's my dynasty running back, so I'm not too upset about him being number 1 on this list. I am just in on Taylor being number 1, though. I know that he didn't – you've talked about how he's had one of the lowest scoring overall number one running back seasons of the last however many years. But here's the thing with Taylor. He's still very young. His offense could be even better, should be even better this year than it's been the last 2 years. And obviously last year with Wentz and when Taylor was awesome. Give me Taylor at number one overall, despite the pass catching ceiling being what it is. Another stat from the newsletter that's already out that I thought was just crazy. So he averaged 6.8 yards per rush against 6 or fewer defenders in the box last season. This is per Next Gen Stats, which dates back to 2016. That is a record. No one has done that. So if the offense improves, if Matt Ryan is an upgrade, if Michael Pittman has a nice year, maybe they find a nice secondary weapon amongst that rest of the group of receivers and tight ends. Like if Taylor even gets any relief in the looks he gets, like that, there's more upside yet to be tapped for Taylor, who had one of the all-time total yardage seasons of the last decade for running backs.
Yeah, and make no mistake, this is no discounting of Taylor for me.
For sure.
The matter of the fact for me is Christian McCaffrey can go for 25 fantasy points and not score a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just absurd the upside McCaffrey has. And is Baker the best quarterback he's played with?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Maybe.
Full stop. Yeah.
Yeah. And same with JT. I mean, Phillip Rivers may be better than Matt Ryan. Depends on, where they're at in their careers.
I just don't know. Matt Ryan, as recently as 2020, was the QB 12, and Atlanta still stunk then too. I think Phillip Rivers still had the smarts when he got there, but the arm was completely shot. I think Ryan still has it. Like he was on such a bad team last year, and he has a great offensive line. He should have a chance to really show out this year.
Well, and I mean, towards down the stretch there, Frank Reich and company really relied on Jonathan Taylor. Like Naheem Hines just dropped off the face of the earth because they had to have Taylor out there. I don't think they want to do that with their franchise running back.
They've said as much, yes.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I'm not saying like there's a world where Naheem Hines touches suddenly ruin Jonathan Taylor's fantasy value. I just don't see anybody in Carolina challenging CMC for anything. And if he plays a full season, everybody's going to be like, oh, we forgot that Christian McCaffrey might be the greatest thing in fantasy since LaDainian Tomlinson, which he is. And that's why he's my number one overall.
Yep. So I have McCaffrey too. And the injuries are the only concern for me. You said it. When he's on the field, that guy is just a cheat code. He can put up 25 points and not score a touchdown. I've seen it multiple times because Cam Newton is scoring 2-yard rushing touchdowns with Christian McCaffrey being the decoy. And
even Sam Darnold was doing that.
Yes, even Sam Darnold last year was amazingly scoring rushing touchdowns. Whatever the prop is on Baker Mayfield rushing touchdowns, maybe go find it and take the over.
Maybe take the over
with McCaffrey. But I said it the other week when it comes to Barkley, and it's a little bit the same to a lesser degree with McCaffrey. It's just hard to tell people to do the same, to take this guy as high, this high every year and have him let you down. And it's been injuries with McCaffrey, not performance, which with Barkley, it's been a mix of both. But it's just kind of human nature I'm bumping him all the way down to 2. I just want to see him stay healthy. And I want to see the Panthers not give him the ball 30 times a game because he can still be awesome with 22 touches a game with like the Austin Ekeler workload, basically. Yeah. And if he's healthy, he's probably going to be the top guy. I just think Jonathan Taylor is safer at this point than Christian McCaffrey. So it's kind of a philosophy thing. Are you shooting for the outlier at top, or are you going with the guy who, unless he gets hurt, which he hasn't, every back can get hurt, but I would say people would agree, a smaller chance of Jonathan Taylor getting hurt, just like the nicks and bruises, than Christian McCaffrey. Anybody can have the big injuries, but just the nicks and bruises, I think Taylor is the safer bet in that regard.
Yeah, I will say our boy Edwin Porras, DPT, who does great fantasy analyst.
Ulysses Kansas, stand up.
Ulysses Kansas did point out that last year's injuries to CMC were like as freakish as they could get. Yep. Like these normally don't happen, and when they do, it's like there's nothing the player could have done. It's not like CMC has like a reoccurring, ACL or Achilles injury.
For sure.
Which I don't like people like arguing that injuries are the concern, and you're not doing that, certainly. But just to say, the guy's been injured.
But I am saying they are the only concern. They are my only concern.
Yeah, they are.
But that's my tiebreaker between 1 and 2, not like moving McCaffrey down to like 8
Yeah, well, and to those drafting Austin Ekeler ahead of CMC, just think about it. Get to work. Read a little bit. Read a book. Sit down. Touch some grass. Figure something out.
Touch some grass. Okay, on that note, I think we have worn this video out. That is going to do it for this first ever YouTube only video of the Half Point Per podcast. We're going to try and do this. I'm not going to commit to like a specific amount of times, but we'll bring you a couple of these before the season to give some additional content. Follow us on all social media platforms, Half Point Per podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube. Subscribe to the Substack. We're going to have all kinds of team previews coming out there. Thank you guys so much for listening, and in this case, watching, and we will talk to you all very soon.